is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 764. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how are the Cube events going? You know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, the Road to Cube Worlds. I won a couple Cube tokens. That's great. I played in one 64-player draft, and my deck was not good.
Okay.
And I won round one against a much better deck. Round two was a heartbreaker. My opponent was at the end of the game, they're at 1 life with 2 Dark Confidant triggers on the stack, and I didn't win that game.
And they went land or 0-0? Oh.
Yeah, land.
Oh, that's a toughie. How's the competition been in those things? Is it tough?
It's tough. Like round one, I played against Tristan Wild LaRue,
Oh, yeah.
Pro Tour mainstay. Although I guess given the current system, he didn't play the last Pro Tour, but yes, he's played a ton of Pro Tours. He's quite good. And every single time I do a draft, I just recognize multiple people in the pod in this like 64s.
That's a bad sign for that. Well, good luck with those. We're going to talk a couple of things about Bloomburrow colors, how they're breaking down, and how to attack the format, as well as the speed of the format and that type of stuff with Bloomburrow, because it turns out it feels fast and it is fast. And in order for us to properly break down this information, we're bringing back, talk about a mainstay, Sierkovitz back on the show. Sierko, welcome back. It's great to see you.
Yes, I know that there's been a petition to get me out of the show, but the mob has not won.
Not today. They'll take their one victory.
Yeah, we'll see how you do today.
Yet again.
You crush it every time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, it's great to see you. Were you going to say something?
I'm going to say that I'm thrilled to be here because Bloomburrow is a fun format.
Yeah, it has been. And
I like Bloomburrow.
I do too. It's interesting because I think if you showed me the numbers for it ahead of time, I would have said, oh boy, here we go again. And there's a little bit of that with Bloomburrow, but it's also fun. It's actually been a fairly well-balanced, pretty cool format. So we're going to talk about that today. Before we do, we want to say thank you to each and every person who supports us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources if you're interested. We also want to say thank you to Ultimate Guard. We mentioned the World's Cube, as Luis called it, coming up in a few months' time in Las Vegas, and that is put on by Ultimate Guard. So it's a really, really cool event, and it's just one of the many cool things that they do in the community, as well as, of course, the products that they sell. And if you're interested in those, you can go to ultimateguard.com, and you can pick them up at your local your local game store or your favorite online retailer, whichever one suits you best. Thank you, Ultimate Guard. We do appreciate it. One of the things you get for being a patron is you get access to the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from Michael, who says, hey, Marcel and Luis, reigning LR listener draft champion from PAX in 2015 here, he says. When can we get another live show? I'd love to defend my title I've had for almost a decade now. That was so awesome. Michael took that thing down, but we had a really, really fun live show at PAX where we did the podcast live. We had all of the co-hosts, hosts, etc., kind of in a panel form. And then we kind of did a contest type thing to see who got to draft with us. And Michael was the one who ended up taking that thing down. Louis, should we do another one of those?
It'd be fun, but
I don't know where we would do it.
I think the last time we had a really good opportunity to be in the same room was PT Amsterdam, which you didn't go to.
Okay. So Michael just set me up to get blasted. I get it.
But I'm sure if the opportunity comes up, it will be fun. I don't see myself doing a lot of traveling in the near to medium term, let's say.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep my eye out though, Michael. That was a special evening and a really, really fun event. And I would like to do another one of those at some point. So I'll keep it in mind for sure. Sierko, let's do a crack-a-pack, a Sierko-focused crack-a-pack, if you will, just to get your take on the format, where you're at with it. And then we'll talk a little bit more in depth about what the color pairs are doing, the archetypes, and what you've been drafting. But for now, crack-a-pack it is. And our first card out is Take Out the Trash. Did you remember to do that today, Sierkovitz, before recording the podcast?
No, it's a Monday evening that I take out the trash. That's the garbage day.
So lucky. All right. One in a red
every 2
instant.
weeks, it's also recycling, so I have it easy to remember. Yeah. Also, we don't have raccoons. Yeah.
Oh, they don't exist where you live?
I think that there are some feral raccoons in UK, but not where I live. We do have foxes. They are plentiful.
But we have them. We got them all over the place here. Take out the trash. One in a red instant. Does 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. And if you control a raccoon, you may discard a card if you do draw a card. Where are you at on take out the trash, or maybe just red in general?
Take out the trash. I would separate take out the trash from the red, because red is sort of trash, and this is more of a takeout. This is like the best red common by a country mile. And for me, this kind of a card, I don't want to first pick it most of the time. Although I wouldn't be like absolutely devastated if I had to. But I definitely, if I see it like pick 4, pick 5, I treat it as a strong signal to me that red is open. And if I want to move into some kind of a red adjacent deck, that would be the signal I'm going to be looking for hardest if take out the trash goes slightly later.
Luis, take out the trash or leave it in?
I would typically not take this card early, just for the same reason that Sierkovitz said. Like, I just don't think you need to start with a red card if you can avoid it. Like, it's the way I look at my first picks in a lot of these sets is what decks can I draft if I take this card, or what different archetypes are there? And for that reason, you don't really want to start with a red or blue card, because that just limits your choices a lot more than even a slightly worse green, white, or black card. And for me, starting with a green card is just the best, because like I think that green has a lot of the decks I like drafting. I like drafting frogs. I like drafting squirrels. I like drafting rabbits. Those decks are all awesome. Especially frogs is my favorite because it's really fun to play. But they're all very good. Raccoons not so much. So, but when you first pick take out the trash, what are you looking to do? You're probably looking to draft lizards. Maybe draft mice, red, black, and red, white. You're not really looking to draft red, green. You're definitely not looking to draft red, blue.
Right. Yeah, that's a tough one. Sassacap's Brew. That's the one in a red instant, and as an additional cost, you discard a card, target player draws 2 cards, and you can gift a tap fish to give a creature +2/+0 until end of turn as well.
Yeah, so that's the trash that needs taking out.
There you go. Junkblade Bruiser. This is the 3 red, 3 green, or 3 green-red. You can choose 4/5 Raccoon Berserker with trample, and whenever you expend 4, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn.
That's like filler minus.
Filler minus. Yeah. What do you think, Luis? Filler minus?
Definitely. Like if I've had red green decks where this card is actively good, but you also just don't have to take it before like 10th pick because no one else is taking it.
Yeah, it sees more play than I thought it would. I like it more than I thought I would. I really thought it would be.
I mean, it's a 5-mana Colossal Dreadmaw.
Yeah,
it's pretty good.
Not the worst. Sometimes. But you give it a little bit of help and it gets really good too.
Sometimes is the problem, of course.
Yes. Starlit Soothsayer. That's the 2 and a black 2/2 flyer. And at the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, you surveil 1.
This is just a Junkblade Bruiser, but black. It's a card that you'll play in the deck sometimes that goes in, and you don't have to take it over anything, really.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because, they tried to thread the needle on it being a payoff for the Bats deck, but also just being a playable. And it feels like the playable part fell a little bit short and the payoff part fell a little bit short. When you combine them, it can eke into a deck here or there. But I mean, generally speaking, you're looking for a better payoff or a thing that enables so that loses you or gains you life. And this kind of sits in the awkward middle is what I found. What do you think, Sirko? You're a Soothsayer fan?
Yeah, that can be like a small side topic, but there's plenty of those creatures. And I've seen that through, I'm doing coaching now a bit, so I've seen how people perceive it. And lots of people fall into that trap when they read.
Who have you found to coach you?
Nice one. I actually coached Shivam Bhatt. Thank you very much.
Very nice.
There we go.
But I found that there's plenty of those things that are sort of false friends, where they have Bat written over them, and people just pick it and put it in their Bat deck, but they are performing pretty badly. And this is kind of a card. It does, if any deck does it does decently. It's actually lizards, because a couple of those points of damage through evasion is actually useful there. But it's not doing very well in the bats deck. And people put it just because it says bat, and it finds the wrong homes, and that lowers the win rate additionally on top of it not being a great card. I mean, I would definitely not pick it. I'd rather not draft a deck where I have to play it, even though I think black is the best color, because best color is the term that we want to be using a lot. No?
We'll talk about that after.
I guess I have a title for the podcast. Black is the best color. Sierkovitz. Next is
black is the new black.
Yeah, there you go. Pileated Provisioner. This is the 4 and a white 3/4 flyer. When it ATBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control without flying.
Literally everything we said about the last two cards applies to this one. I think we just move on.
Totally.
This one is another false friend, because it's actually best in the white-red decks, because the targeting ability and having a lot of ground creatures make it slightly better in there.
Okay. Here's your green card. It's Tree Guard Duo. This is the 3 and a green 3/4. And when it enters, until end of turn, target creature you control gets vigilance and +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures you control. This card has a big impact.
Yeah. This is the kind of a card that looks slightly junky in the previous season, but as soon as you played it, you knew that it's going to be good. And now that I'm playing games, all the game revolves around this card sometimes.
Definitely.
Because someone blinks it, or because you just like, I'm going to win it unless they draw the second Tree Guard Duo. And if a card at a common level has this kind of an effect on the game, that's usually a good sign. And I think that there are two cards like that in this format. At this and Scales of Shale, that basically sometimes games revolves around hoping that the opponent doesn't draw it.
Right.
And that's why I don't think it's a stronger card than Take Out the Trash, but I would definitely pick it over Take Out the Trash, because it comes with the package of green being a decent color.
Yeah, I've been really impressed by it. Also, in a format where being on board, getting damage through things that, affect combat is at a premium, this does all of those things. Right? I mean, it's a good body, and it also gives you almost every single time an attack that you didn't have before, let alone if you can put it on a flyer or a trampler or lifelink or something, to really get that big bump. And then, as you said, there's multiple engines, particularly in the Frogs deck, that allow you to pick this up at least one more time, but there's even some that allow you to blink it or do it multiple times or once per turn, if you get to the good amount of mana, and all of a sudden this thing becomes the most important card on the battlefield. And that's really tough.
It becomes Abyss sometimes when you play against Frog, and then they just like flip it, attack with my Pond Prophet, chump. Attack with my Pond Prophet, chump.
Yes, and I have been on the bad side of that. I really I had to chump every single turn and try to find ways to get damage back in. And if I had found a removal spell for the Tree Guard Duo, all my problems are solved, right? But I mean, that's a common, that's pretty impressive. Finch Formation is next. This is the 2 and a blue 2/2 flyer. And when it enters, target creature you control gains flying until end of turn, and you can offspring it for another 3. Man, I thought, preview season wise, I thought this was going to be like a blue staple, a really good card, and it's just flopped about as hard as blue has.
Blue-white birds being basically terrible has not really helped its cause.
No.
And it just turns out that really the only good blue deck that has a bunch of creatures, the Frogs deck, is just not going to want to use this very often.
Yeah. Bad.
Yeah. This card is definitely not the Abyss, but at least it would be good against Mode. But that's not enough. That's not enough for Bloomburrow, I think.
Last common is Might of the Meek. This is the red instant target creature gets trample. Until end of turn, it also gets +1/+0 until end of turn. If you control a mouse and it's a cantrip, you draw a card as well.
This is the kind of a card that you probably want a copy in some of the decks, but if you cannot get it on the wheel, then probably you shouldn't be drafting that deck.
Luis, are you on Take Out the Trash or Tree Guard Duo at this point?
Tree Guard Duo is not even close.
Not even close. Do you agree with what Sierkovitz said that Take Out the Trash is kind of technically a better card? But you're just more, you want to be more open as you described at the beginning?
Definitely. That's exactly how I would describe it. It's 2-minute deal 3 with upside is a great card. It's just red is way worse than green, and so there's just no real reason to start by doing that.
3-Tree Mascot is actually our last common. It's a foil. The 2-mana 2/1 with Changeling, and you can pay 1 to add a mana of any color once per turn. This is not proven to be important.
No.
Uncommons. Brazen Collector. 1 and a red, 2/1 first strike Raccoon Rogue, and whenever it attacks, you can add red, and until end of turn, you don't lose mana this. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases end, so you get to carry it over.
I mean, this is probably the same level as Take Out the Trash, and as a corollary of what we said about Take Out the Trash, it suffers from the same issues. I guess card is probably at its best in either green-red, which is not particularly easy to draft, because there's just not enough depth. You need to be a bit lucky with the deck being open and the right
It's
card
really easy
being
to draft.
open.
You just take the red and green cards, and then they're not very good.
Yeah, exactly. And it's good in red-black, but again, still you take the Trigger Duo over it because you are more open to multiple opportunities and to deeper colors that will be more likely will not end up in a train wreck.
Consumed by Greed. 1 black instant. Target opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control, and you can gift a card, and if the gift was promised, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. It's a very powerful card.
This is definitely a tempting proposition, and it's my personal preference, but for black in this format, and because of that, I think I would pick it over the Trigger Duo.
I mean, it's a lot better than Trigger Duo, right?
I think it is too.
Yeah.
I would start with the Consumed over to Duo.
Same. Sugarcoat. This is the 2 and a blue flash enchant a creature or food, and the permanent basically becomes a food.
Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
No.
And that's your answer? I love it.
Certainly everything we said about starting with red is like twice as much for blue, because blue has like one deck that you want to draft. Like I still have not.
Come on, there are 2 decks in blue.
The Rats deck is fine. I don't know. I think yeah, okay, it is 2. I just think Frogs is so much better than Rats, at least in.
Okay, no, I think Rats is a legitimate contender in the last weeks, mainly because how abundant blue was. But I think that there's a third one in banned Builder's Talent build-arounds.
I do think Builder's Talent is awesome, and when I play Builder's Talent, I frequently play more than 2 colors, but I wouldn't really consider it a blue deck in that sense.
Right.
Yeah, okay, yeah. But blue is usually the additions.
Our rare is a little sad. It's Castrel the Wind-Crested. This is a blue-white card, so that people are already running for the exit signs, but this is the 3 blue-white 4/5 flying legendary bird scout, and whenever 1 or more birds you control deal combat damage to a player, you can choose one. You can draw a card. You can put a +1/+1 counter on each bird you control, or you can put a bird creature card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. I mean, it's
a great card.
This is an amazing card.
With it.
Yeah.
I managed to trophy with it, but it was splashed in a black-white deck.
Louis, do you even even with all of that really powerful stuff going on, is this even on your radar?
No, I first picked this card before, and I've just regretted it pretty heavily. It's just not very good in just to start in blue-white. I just don't think blue-white's very functional. So
yeah, even if you have a bomb level card like this, it still just doesn't support it.
Definitely.
So Consumed by Greed?
The card, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Kestrel you want to get late when you are in the easy splashable kind of white adjacent deck.
Black-white sounds great for that. I could see splashing it in Frogs. That's the kind of deck that could use that. Like Frogs, I've also had some success splashing where you can splash Glarb or you can splash the Bant Legend and all that.
I prefer to splash Glarb. That's probably a better Frog deck if you can have Glarb in it.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Glarb's really good. But Kestrel, I'm not saying, again, I use this example, Sierkovitz, many times on this show. If you did 100 drafts of the format, how many times were you, would it be right if you were drafting, optimally, to draft each deck? And in this format, just off the top of my head, if you drafted 100 times, you should probably be blue-white maybe twice or something. 2 to 5 times for blue-white, 2 to 5 times for blue-red, and then you should be of the 4 best decks probably 10 to 15 times each or something like that. That's kind of how I look at it. Where if you want to maximize your chances of doing well in a draft, you should sometimes draft even the bad archetypes, but it does not start by first picking Castrol. What happens is you have a bunch of white cards and you get a 6-pick Castrol and you're like, oh, and Plume Creed Mentor Wheels. And then you're just like, okay, maybe in this instance, I'm actually supposed to draft blue-white. But I've even had a good blue-white deck that has a lot of the rares and uncommons and still didn't feel that good. So I wouldn't be shocked if the answer of how many times you're supposed to draft straight blue-white or straight blue-red out of 100 is like very low, like even lower than 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's drafted around 3% of the time. So
there we go.
But on the other hand, you open Castrol in your first pick only once in a something like 500 draft. So
yeah, I was gonna I was gonna ask that because one thing that I like to do to kind of translate some of the things that we talk about with you, Sirko, and Luis and I cover on the show statistically and stuff is to try to put it into the form of like a use case, right? So a good example would be that, like, Luis, do you have an idea what that would look like? Like, let's say you're at the Pro Tour, or at a whatever the GP event or something like that, and you have some stakes on the line and you want to do well. It's a serious event, and you end up in blue-white. So you message me and Paul, or you come back and show me your deck if I'm there. What is the story on how you actually got in there on the 2% of the time or whatever it is? Is it that you open this card, you take a bunch of white cards, and then you wheel it or something, and you're like, okay, I guess I'll just take this bomb rare and blue-white, and then you just sort of end up being heavy white with a little bit of blue, including this? Like, what does that actually look like in your mind?
I mean, in my mind, it looks like I'm in white. It looks like white is not going super well, but I see that blue is open. I see like pick 6 in pack 1, Castrol, pick it and pivot into blue and supplement it with like 3 best white cards in the pack 2 and 3 best white cards.
So you actually see it the opposite of the example I gave, where you're heavy white, but you just can't nail down the second color, and then it ends up being...
I'm heavy white. I cannot be heavy white. I see it more like I got this, pick 1, pick 2, pick 3 good white cards, then it dries out, which it frequently does when the color is popular. And I have the same in pack 2. I get the 3 powerful white cards in the first 3 picks, but nothing much more after that. But blue is flowing. I can supplement it with medium powered blue cards that go late. I can still pick the most powerful white cards from the first 3 packs that I open that are passed to me in each round. And you end up with this. I mean,
interesting. Yeah, because I think,
or again as a splash.
The way I was imagining it, or how it's happened for me, has been basically the opposite of that. Where like I go hard into white, and maybe let's say I take an early red white card or a red card, and I think, okay, maybe mice or something's coming around with that. But I keep taking up like decent white cards. In a higher level draft, the competition's usually tough, and you don't just get gifts that often, right? But also in a higher level draft pod, people will know that Azorius is something that you generally want to avoid, and they'll be very aware of it. And so then, but maybe I'll get a late Kestrel or whatever. I'll pick up a couple of, okay blue cards, but really I'm trying to hold out to make the white cards that I'm getting work. And it just never quite comes there, where like the red cards don't come in. Everybody's cutting green, so rabbit's kind of off the table, and I just end up with 2 blue-white rares and an uncommon and a decent blue uncommon, and I go, okay, fine, this is the one where I'm Azorius, but really I'm heavy white with just a little bit of blue rather than the other way around. What do you think, Luis?
Yeah, I think that...
Sketch out your nightmare for me here.
I think that the way I would be most likely to end up in blue-white is if I started with some strong white cards, then white dried up, and then I saw a good blue card. And that's maybe a way to get to use both all the cards I have, especially if it was like a Kestrel or something like that, where it's, specifically good in blue-white. The problem is I think the blue cards and the white cards just work together so poorly, whereas like the blue cards and the black cards and the blue cards and the green cards work together a little bit better.
Let's take a look at the big... go ahead, Sirky.
I mean, I looked at what makes the blue-white decks tick, and honestly, the thing I found is that best blue-white decks are literally almost mono-white
Really?
go
blue
wide,
cards.
aggressive decks with rapid responses, and a bit of blue added in because the looter is great. There are a couple of really good cards that can supplement it, but it basically was an almost mono white deck, aggressive and nothing to do with birds.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
it's really like birds were better in red white because both the 5 mana one and the 4 mana one hybrid bird are targeting something, so they trigger Valiant, and they were actually performing slightly better in red white.
Let's take a look at the archetypes big picture, and then we'll get your take on it, Sierkovitz, about how you've been approaching the format, what you've been drafting, what's been working, what's been not. Things have constricted a bit since the last time we talked about this. Actually, really interesting. I think that, like, Luis, you as a game designer, I think if I were to lay out the way that the archetypes are stacked, you would probably just take that, like, before the format came out, as kind of a win. Basically, it's still green, white, and black, green at the top at around 57%. But if you look at the spread all the way down, and the only two I'm going to leave off are blue, white, and blue, red, the ones that we've been kind of hammering on here, it goes down to 54.5%. You know, so you've got about a 3% spread across the whole thing. And then it does drop off. Azorius is 52.5, and Izzet is an absolutely disastrous 51.
40 something. Oh,
40, 51 now. But I mean,
yeah, because Marshall is looking only at pure 2-color decks without the splashes.
That's right. I am only that is true. It's pure 2 colors. Because I mean, is this not just a 2-color format?
Yeah, it is. At some of those splashes will be just pure 2-color decks, but because of this quirks with the hybrid cards, they will be counted as a splash. Because if you got the Uncharted Haven and you have a off-color hybrid, all of a sudden it will be counting it as a splash. That's
I see.
Methodological issue.
But that's not bad, right? I mean, even, you know, blue-black bringing up the rear at 54.5%, you know, we're talking about a 3% jump up to Selesnya here, or even less than that.
Yeah, but I mean, this is something that is very typical for the formats. And I look through all of them from that particular specific perspective, is that, and this becomes even more pronounced with better players, that the format starts with a bigger disproportion between the weakest and the strongest archetype. Mm-hmm. And as the format goes on, the sort of win rates converge. It always happens. I think every single format in the last 2 years had that phenomenon that as the format matures, the differences become smaller because self-correcting nature of draft.
Right.
But at the same time, weirdly, the preferences of player go in a separate way when at first the decks are drafted roughly at the even ratios. But as you approach the end of the format, some of the colors are very overdrafted, some of the colors are very underdrafted. And of course, this is connected. The best colors become overdrafted. Because the best colors become overdrafted, their win rate goes down, the win rates flatten.
Yeah, that's one of the things that stands out a little bit to me here is that both Selesnya and Golgari they're effectively tied for the number of times that they've been played, but they're also tied for number one by a good stretch, 36,000 entrants for each at the time when I pulled this right before the show.
63,000. You're counting the
sorry,
wins.
63,000. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. 63,000.
Yeah, that even with like Orzhov being third most popular and Rakdos being fourth most popular.
Yeah, so these are the two most popular and the two best performing decks. I mean, that really has to put a stamp that these are the two places to be if you could choose.
Yeah, Rakdos is 0.1% lower. So, I mean, you cannot like leave it out of the same discussion. And
totally.
It's much less played.
Yeah, that's I was kind of delineating there, but absolutely, Rakdos is exactly right in that same spot. So, you mentioned Sierko that they tend to converge, but they don't always land with this type of distribution, do they?
This is pretty close. I mean, this is like really close, except for Azorius and Izzet, there is like the difference between the win rates is basically could be attributed to the variance. And right. I think that if you look at the same data, but if you sorted by just the top users, you will have a slightly different picture. Where actually with top players, it's Rakdos that comes out on top. And then you have Selesnya, and then you have Simic and Golgari, and there's absolutely nothing between those two. So like Rakdos has 60.7, Selesnya has 60.6, Simic has 60.5, Golgari has 60.4, and
really?
Dimir has 60.0.
So 0.1,
So-
0.1, 0.1,
and-
0.3. Yeah.
And Orzo far behind at 59.8. So like within 1 percentage points, you have 6 archetypes.
So, Luis, if you're designing Magic and you're about to ship the limited portion and put your stamp on it, would you take this outcome?
Yeah, I would.
Basically, 2 decks, behind, but the rest pretty close.
Yeah. And Sierkovitz is right. Blue-black is better than I've been giving it credit for. I think part of it is just like keeps not coming together for me.
Maybe you should start using the 3 mana thing that discards a card more often.
The which one?
The Mind Rot?
Stalker.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
But I do think that this is a good, healthy spread. I mean, obviously that's not the whole story, but if you were to tell me this is what the limited for this is the spread, you can accept this or you can roll the dice, I would basically always take that. I think that there's a lot of things that go into making a format fun, but having 8 of the 10 decks being pretty close together is awesome. That's actually better than most formats. I would imagine.
Is because it's rare that all 10 archetypes are viable, right? It's pretty common.
I mean, I think it's basically never.
Never. Yeah. So
it's really hard.
Right. And 8 of them's enough for an entire draft table, so that actually ends up working out pretty well. I guess I say that just to say that the expectation, I think, isn't that all 10 archetypes are, tightly packed together and that everything's basically even. That would be the dream, but that is, not really possible in most cases. But yeah, I mean, we have 8 viable archetypes at least here. That's pretty good. What have you been drafting, Sirko? How have you been attacking the format? Are you just hammering Selesnya, Golgari, and Rakdos like everybody else, or are you doing some Sierkovitz stuff?
I'm definitely whenever I can and
what's
it passes
Sierkovitz
through my
stuff?
paws.
He always finds some weird card that he loves and figures it
Builder's
out.
talent. It's just,
Yeah.
just such a great card to play with. And I mean, I tried so many builds of it already, and most of them have been like above average
For
to
builder's
almost
talent?
feeling unbeatable. Yeah.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And the usual. I sometimes play Stocking the Pantry. Sometimes I try to mix it with Blacksmith Talent because it seems like it's working in there as well.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So I tried to do that. I tried a bit of Dimir Control, and that also worked for me relatively decently. I still do think that a good Bats deck, if you find in the right lane, is hard to beat, and it's also sweet to play because it's like, is it aggro? Is it control? Is it mid range? You never know. You have some of those explosive starts with rabbits, and all of a sudden you run out of steam, and you just start dropping the 3/3 flyers that drain for 2 and win the game. Mm-hmm. So I definitely do like white black. I don't go like full in Bat synergies most of the time. I try to make it like a mixture. So the deck I trophied with Kestrel, that was a Bat deck, but I had Patchwork Banner in that deck, and I played it 3 times. And once I played it for rabbits, once I played it for bats, and once I even played it for birds because it was beneficial in that particular situation. I had like a bunch of the 1/2 duos and a Kestrel, and it was better for birds. So I think that I try to don't go all into one synergy, because if you do that maybe too much, you sometimes end up in a train wreck after pack 3 because you just didn't open the right cards. I try to hedge my bets here and there. And I think that rabbits are always a safe bet to have as a sort of base of your deck, and then you can fill it in with the rest when you're playing white.
The rabbit card just works so well, basically by themselves or with other cards. Like
it's just Carrot Cake is just such a great card. It just binds all the synergies. I mean, it is best, of course, in like green-white, but it's great in black-white because it gets the live gain. It's great with Builder's Talent, which is always an asset. It's just phenomenal.
Are you resistant to going down the Azorius or Izzet route?
As I said, I tried to do Izzet. I thought what I had was a busted deck, like absolutely busted. I had like 3 of the 1/1 vigilant, 1/1 unblockable looters. I had a bunch of good spells, like a couple of trash to take out the trash. All the synergy cards. I think 3 of the authors that are making spells cheaper, and went 0-3 with it.
And you went 0-3 with it.
Yeah. Yesterday I opened RAL and I said, okay, look, I'm going to waste 1,500 gems. I don't care. I'm going to try. And that ended up 2-3, I think.
I mean, you're an actual scientist. Like, you can say for science and actually mean it. Like,
I can mean it. Although I also know that when you say for science and you don't reproduce it, it's not really very good science. But I'm not planning to open another RAL and waste another 1,500 gems.
I didn't think I was good at Magic until I top 8'd my second Pro Tour. That was the line. I was able to reproduce it, so I decided, yep, this actually does mean something.
You do the same with children. I mean,
yeah.
I think we've got a decent sample size there. Yeah. I don't think we need to increase that one.
Table.
But we had a person in our lab that had twins, and we were always making fun that he always makes a control and the treatment even when he has offspring.
Luis, didn't you win your first PT top 8?
I did. It's the only one I won, actually.
Wow.
In fact, I'm below average. If you think I'm 1 out of 8 to win my top 8s, I have 10 top 8s and 1 win.
Yeah. Washed Luis.
That's what they call me.
Hasn't won anything since 2008.
Well,
it's all the mulliganing, I think.
Yeah. He's got all these trophies behind him that maybe say otherwise.
And more.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not even the broken ones. Okay, so you tried, you gave it a good effort, but at this point, not so much. So where do you find yourself landing the most often now?
I mean, I do like Golgari, but I just don't find it open ever in the drafts that I'm making.
I draft that one. I think Golgari is actually the deck I most frequently draft.
And I know the deck, and I just like, when you play 20 drafts, how many times will you end up in a particular lane is sort of like
5
semi-random.
Yeah, it could be a good amount, honestly.
Yeah, Golgari. I've been, ever since Luis talked about it on the show a few weeks ago, I've just been drafting the heck out of Golgari too.
I actually had a 4-3 Azorius deck recently. Pure Azorius, just birds and rabbits, obviously.
We'll call that a win.
Bunch of multicolor piles because I do those kind of things. Just mixture of all. I mean, I had this sort of like Sultai phase when I was drafting frogs or squirrels with some splashing. That worked fine. But yeah, no, bits and bobs. I mean, I think most of my drafts I was in green in some shape or form, and if I was not in green, then I was probably most likely white-black.
Are you drafting green because you believe that it is indisputably the best color in the format?
No, I don't believe that it's an indisputably best color in the format. I don't think that there is ever such a thing as undisputably best color in the format. I made a thread about it yesterday.
Oh, interesting. Tell us more.
I think that I understand why, as content creators, we have to talk about what's the best color, because that's what people want to hear, and that's part of the part of the game, that you need to deliver what people want to hear in a way that is also coherent with your opinion of the format. And yes, I do think that for me, there is a best color in this format. And by the way, it's not green, it's black. I think that data also suggests that black has the highest win rate of all the colors when you look at all the things. Possibly because, black-red is actually a good deck, while other decks with combination with red don't do so well. Well, Golgari is also a good deck. Orzhov is a decent deck. And Dimir is actually coming up as a decent deck, especially when in the hands of high win rate players. But
I will say that both black and green, the biggest strength, honestly, is that they can combine well with any color. Like that's such a huge advantage early in the draft.
Well, except for Gruul, maybe. But yeah.
Yeah, but even then, it's draftable.
Yeah, Gruul is sort of like a classic 3-3 or 4-3 kind of deck that, and maybe you open a couple of bombs and all of a sudden it becomes decent. But the point is that it's all very general, and you have to keep in mind, first of all, we're looking at average win rates when you compare those things. So it's very hard from the average win rates to identify a single person that does better. But I did a bit of digging, and for example, if you looked at the win rates of, darnell, where did I lose my graphs, my holy graphs? First of all, the order of the color power sort of changes through the format. So like, if you looked at the numbers, I'm not talking about subjective opinions, but about numbers, In the week 1, green seemed to be the highest win rate color, but then week 2 and week 3 it changed to black. And that's because, of course, people started drafting more green. Black was a bit abandoned in the week 2-3, and I think that people benefited from understanding that black is now more open and drafting more of it. So it became the sort of highest win rate color combination. But then it also has to take into account your personal preferences, and I'm sure that if Luis likes drafting green in this format, he's also doing very well with it, and much better because he spent more time drafting it. He understands all the little bits and pieces and can form a better plan because he's got practice out of it. I looked at the data for lower win rate players, and for them, actually, the highest win rate color was white. And this is something that you can also see consistently through different sets, that white is designed in such a way that it's more friendly to beginner players or lower win rate players.
It just
because
does
the strategy is simpler. Cards have a higher floor, lower ceiling. Blue is the opposite. Blue is a very low floor and very high ceiling, while white is sort of delivered that best player cannot capitalize too much from white cards most of the time because they do what they do. That's it. But lower win rate players will get the floor, which is quite high, and because of that, they will be winning with it more. So if I'm talking about best color, should I take into account that maybe the largest group is the beginners or the 50% win rate players, or should I address my my comments to the people that have 65% win rate or are Paul Cheon and don't even go that low as 65% win rate, and maybe tell them that black is the best color for them? Actually, when you look at the top players from the last week, and that was something that was that I found was a bit of a quirk. Green had the lowest win rate of all the colors for the top players in the last week. Yeah. But top players honestly do as well with every color as they did with the best one. So there's very small differences between what they do. And this is something that's
really interesting.
Like they do decently with blue. Like Izzet is not doing. Like when we were talking about those win rates for the color pairs in the top player department, the top win rate was 60.7. Izzet has 57% win rate, which is not terrible. I mean, it's a bit lower than the average, but it's actually higher than Azorius in case of the Izzet players. But blue, so I calculate those color rates by looking at percentage of decks played with each color and what are their win rates. And in the last week for the top players, black had 58.6, white had 58.5, blue had 58.3, red had 57.8, and green had 57.4. That was very different in week 1 when green was the highest win rate color with 59.2, sort of exactly with black, and then blue and red were at like 57.7. So the problem is that the win rate of green has dropped off significantly over those 3 weeks because people started drafting it more and more, while blue and red sort of stayed in the same place roughly, or even in case of blue improved because people learned better how to build those decks. And we're talking about good players who know how to improve and use the knowledge that they have of the format to make it better and utilize the fact also that blue is more open right now.
So does there's one axis though that doesn't show up when you say these things, which is how often.
Yeah, there is also that, and it is true that you can't draft blue. You cannot just force blue. Forcing in general is a concept that may be happening in the early format because there people don't know what they're doing, and there will be a consistent omissions on their side, and you will get cards that you should have no business of getting. And that's why you sometimes say in week 4 that, oh, I drafted a week 1 deck. And this means people in my pot had no idea that those cards were good and gave me all the goodies and I could do whatever I wanted. But in week 4, this is something unusual, while in week 1 it's normal. So in week 4, the later in the format, the more it becomes the proverbial drafting the hard way when you have to read the signals and try to react to them. In case of blue, there is also a problem that, blue can be open and you still don't get anything good. So to go into blue, you need to first see a couple of good cards and pick them maybe speculatively. And when you have 2 good blue cards, That's already like a good nucleus of starting drafting a blue deck. And then you have like black is open, so I'm picking good black removal, good black evasive creatures, maybe some rat synergies. Maybe I got like was it Vryn, the multicolor
the
legend?
black rare, yeah.
And then maybe you will pick like 2-3 more good blue cards, which there are some of those, or maybe like playable blue cards. And all of a sudden you get into a Dimir deck, but you didn't force it. You reacted to seeing a couple of good blue cards and speculatively picking them. And then later in the draft, you were rewarded for doing that because blue is usually open. But you cannot force it because you don't have that guarantee that you're going to get those 2 good blue cards, because they won't happen in every pod that you're playing.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. Because to me, my mind always goes to takeaways, right? Like we talk about the data, but I want to know, well, what should I do at the table, or what should our listeners do at the table? They can kind of put themselves categorically where they think they belong on that continuum. But, if we, one of the other things that, you'd think that you'd get from green, especially if you're at the beginner or intermediate level, is that the depth of the color seems to be there, perhaps the deepest of the colors as far as playables go, or cards that you're happy to play or something like that, where you can get bailed out a little bit, right? Sometimes you take a few green cards early, and even if it's not super open, enough stuff gets opened that you just sort of end up with, well, I'm just going to take the green card out of this pack. And if you try that with other colors, you might get into that range of cards that are really not cards that, not just Ds, but cards that you're like, oh man, this doesn't really do much in this format, or it's not well suited for it, or whatever. Where if you happen to be in green and find yourself in that situation, even the lower end green cards are like, yeah, okay, sure. This is a card that people play. It's like a safety net.
So I think that it's a good to set yourself up a baseline of what cards in each color, at least at common, are good, and which cards are universally good and which are not necessarily universally good. Because I see those mistakes being made relatively frequently, and it's like, for example, with white commons, like Intrepid Rabbit is a universally good white card. It fits in every deck. But this is a format with high synergies, and not every card will go for every deck. And one of the main mistakes that I think is the sort of mistake is people overvaluing Carrot Cake, Warren Elder, and Head of the Homestead in white-red decks. Because these are white cards, they are good white cards, they put them in the white-red decks, and those cards perform significantly worse in the white-red deck while you have to sacrifice a high enough pick. The Carrot Cake is amazing in all the other white decks, but it just has medium numbers in white-red. And there are those like... fake friends. The Rabbit Response is another card that gets put into way too many white, black, and white, red decks. I know that there will be some of those decks where Rabbit Response is good, but a lot of the time it's just not great. Another thing like I see so often is those hybrid cards are not all of them are performing well outside of their intended color pair. Moonrise Cleric is a great example.
Yeah.
This card has really bad numbers anywhere outside of white-black. But on the other hand, you have cards like Seedpod Squire, which is actually better performing than Carrot Cake in white-red decks, because that targeting is actually doing something in those decks. And, the 3-4 mana 3/3 flyer is not absolutely outrageous. And this is the sort of like false friend, because people see bird, they want to put it with birds. But actually, it is a friend with valiant creatures. And you have like dozens of those little cases. Like Hop to It is also not a great card in white-red. It's got very medium numbers compared to what it does in other decks. Feather of Flight, for example, which is a decent card in most of the white decks, is terrible in white-black because white-black, most creatures already have flying. So why would you put it there?
Right.
Seasoned Warren Guard, absolutely terrible in white-red, because that's not what white-red wants to be doing. It doesn't want to go wide. It wants to go and trigger its abilities. Intrepid Rabbit is an exception there, because Intrepid Rabbit is not good there because it goes wide, but because it creates 2 target triggers, basically. So so that's what you want to see.
Yeah, that reflects, a lot on what Luis talks about a lot these days, especially, post-set review, like when people come and listen to the format overview and shows like last week with Paul and this week with you, Sierko, Luis will often talk, especially in formats like this where there's pretty clear signposts about what decks does this card go in, right? When you look at a card, you don't just say, well, it's green, so it goes in all green decks. It's like, well, this is a card that, sometimes Luis will say, this green card I view as a gold card for this one particular color pair because it really doesn't do much else. Like the other decks just don't want it at all. Even though, if you looked at it in a more simplistic way, you might just think, well, it's green, so this leaves me in green, and that's it. But as we often see, there are cards that are really earmarked for specific archetypes, or maybe it fits in 2 of the 4 archetypes that it could go in, or maybe it fits in all of them. And these are all relevant things to know before you select a card, because if you slam a Pawn Prophet and say, well, I can be in any blue or green deck, you may be mistaken about that, down the line.
You are, by the way. I mean, Pawn Prophet is so much better in blue-green decks, because it's not only that it's easier to cast, it's also that it's more synergistic with what green-blue decks have to offer. And I get it. Sometimes those cards will be doing okay outside of their scope, but very often they don't. I mean, like, I look at Corpseberry Cultivator, awful outside of the Golgari decks, and not even that great in Golgari decks. Cinder Cutthroat, awful outside of the Lizards deck, but it's okay actually in the Lizard deck. And
it goes in the Lizard deck. Which one is it okay in?
That's just the Lizard deck.
No, just the Lizard deck. It's
it's only okay in just the Lizard deck. I got you. Okay.
Yeah, and you have a couple of those false friends as well. That cards that look like they will be a card from this deck, but it actually works in a different one. And I think that Raccoon Rallier is a sort of like this example when it actually does.
It's actually a mice card.
It's actually a mouse card. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's really that to me is where you get to the real depth of a format, is when you start to understand, when you look beyond just what color is this and make the assumption that it can go into any color, but really start to figure out what archetypes each one wants. And that lets you reflect back on, okay, I took this card early, but did it actually do what you thought? Did it keep you open like you thought? When a lot of times that's not actually the case. It actually puts, if you're playing it optimally, and this to me is probably, where you see a lot of that spread between when you look at the top players versus the not top players, is that understanding is being translated, not just to, if you ask the person about the card and to rate the card where it would go, that they may answer it correctly, but they're also folding that into the draft portion as well, and not running themselves into corners, right? Where, you think, well, okay, I took the Rallier or whatever, it's red, I could just go into any red deck. But then, you realize over time, that's not actually true. Like, this card's not doing well in Lizards. This card's, just okay in green-red, where it was kind of supposed to be really good. But then you realize, okay, this is a card that I really want for the mice deck. That informs early, right? It's not just, I'm in mice, I know this card's good, so I'll take it. That's also a benefit that you get out of knowing this. But it also means if you take it early, let's say you have a bad pack, pack 1, pick 3 or something, and you end up taking it out of there, hey, I'm kind of narrowing in on mice deck primarily here. And if I end up in something other than that, this card's probably not going to make the cut, or if it does, it's going to be one of my worst cards. And that's a valuable thing to guide the actual draft, to lead you to a better deck at the end of the draft. Sierkovitz, I wanted to talk to you about your favorite topic, speed of the format.
Not the 16th century Baroque in Middle Poland.
Your second favorite.
Damn it.
Yeah.
That was my specialist topic.
I didn't research that one quite yet. So just to set the stage here, we talked about it a little bit before, but we're back in the saddle. Okay. We had a little bit of a break with MH3.
That was OTJ, wasn't it?
What's that?
That was OTJ, the saddle part.
That was... I don't get it. Anyway, but
throw from the saddle.
Oh, the saddle. Gotcha. Yeah. No, but we're back. Did we ever leave? Kind of. MH3 was actually faster, but it just felt so different from a format perspective that it doesn't really match up with these. I'm looking at the fastest and the most advantage on the play. So like if you win the coin flip, what is your base win rate starting from there? And but I'm looking at the normal sets, right? Nothing like Cube or anything like that. And Bloomburrow is right back up there with what we've seen recently. It is currently number 2 on speed. It's between 8.6 and 8.7 turns that the games average end on average, and number 2 only to 1, which is still, by the way, much faster. And then it's also number 2 on game win rate on the play at over 53%. And again, MKM is the only one that's historically on Arena ever been more advantaged. Now, I think that the ship will turn on this. Like I said, I mentioned this on the show before, but I talked to some Wizards designers, and they said that they're very much aware of it. But this wasn't that long ago that I talked to them, and there's a long pipeline, a year at least before you start to see any type of changes. And then also they have to nail it. It's hard to, these things are not easy to nail down. But I mean, look, the bottom line is, if you look at the sets that appear on here, like I can tell you what they are, right? They're they're Bloomburrow, they're MKM, they're Mom, they are Woe, they're Lord of the Rings, they're OTJ, right? All of these are the fastest that we've had over the past ever. I should say these are the fastest we've had ever, and they've all come out in the past 2 years or something like that. So we've talked about this at length on the show, so not going to harp on it too much, but I have to say that even though Bloomburrow is right near the top on both of these, it's number 2 fastest, number 2 game win rate on the play all time on Arena for regular sets, it's not really hampering my enjoyment of the format. Like, it still feels kind of fun. And Luis, you and I were chatting about it. It doesn't actually feel as though the games end this quickly that often. It's weird.
Yeah, I think the Bloomburrow is quite fast, and if you don't put good, 2 mana plays, and in some cases 1 mana plays in your deck, you do definitely risk losing quite quickly. Like, if you don't have a 2-drop on the draw, I feel like it doesn't mean you have to mulligan, but you got to consider it, especially if your 3 and 4s aren't like good catch-up cards. Mm-hmm. But if you do have the 2-drop and they have the 2-drop and you both get on the board early, I do feel like the games have been pretty good and also of reasonable length, where like I have had games go to decking. I've had games go where like, oh, I need to have this card in my deck to finish the game because like the game gets kind of stalled out or what have you. And like, there's a lot of creatures on the board, and Magic is a game where the rules fundamentally favor the defender. So the average board, which has 4 creatures on each side, is probably no profitable attacks for either side, not knowing any other information, right? If you ask me, it's turn 8. It's a game unlimited. Both players have 4 creatures in play. I would say, like, yeah, my assumption is that the attacks are either like slightly good or not good. Like, they're just not that likely to be someone's just smashing because double blocking is really powerful. So I have gotten convinced, especially now that we know the actual speed of every format. I don't care about format speed as a metric that much because format speed can point to a format that's not as enjoyable, definitely. And like the fact that 1 was the fastest format and also the worst format in the last probably 5 years or something, 3 years. I don't know. I don't really know. I don't know what the worst format before 1 was because it's so much worse than everything else. Maybe AFR. I really did not like that one.
Yeah, but Ixalan something in there or whatever.
Ixalan also.
Dominaria?
Ixalan's 8 years ago now, just so we're clear.
Right, exactly.
I liked both Dominarias a lot.
But it's on this list. I mean, Ixalan was one of the first sets from Arena, right? So
it was legendarily bad set. Yes, I do agree with that. But I look at all that, and what really I think makes my enjoyment of format go up or down is like, do the games play well? Are the cards interesting? Are the build arounds good? And format speed doesn't necessarily impact those that much. Yes, I do wish the formats were probably a little bit slower than Bloomburrow, because I don't think it's overall good that most formats these days, if you're on the draw and you don't have a 2-drop, you feel like you're at a severe disadvantage. If you go back and play some old formats, you can keep a hand with no plays until turn 4 and often be fine. I'm not saying that's even a good world. I'm just saying that's like there's like a spectrum there. Not needing a 2-drop or being behind, I think that puts a little bit more pressure on you in both the draft and gameplay portion than I would like. But the Bloomburrow games have been fun. I've drafted a lot of this set, and I continue enjoying it.
What's your take, Sierko? I mean, we're well over 53% game win rate on the play in Bloomburrow. Like, there's no real way to slice that as being acceptable or good, right?
Yeah.
So this was one of the most painful analyses I had to do, but I did it. because unfortunately 17 lands, among its many, many positive things, you cannot easily get your own data and your own personal win rate on the play and on the draw. But I was wondering, because it always made me think, I don't feel like I'm that disadvantaged when I'm on a draw. And I actually checked my data from a couple of sets, and it came out I had a slightly higher win rate on the draw than on the play.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, generic 17 lands user has a much higher win rate on the play, and it makes sense. But I think that this is the sort of side effect of how people build their best of one decks, where they try to be like, I want to be all in aggressive, and when that doesn't come together, then I'm just dead. And of course, it's much easier to be super aggressive when you're on the play than when you're on the draw, which means that you built your deck to win on the play, but you also built your deck to sort of lose on the draw.
Oh, okay.
Because
but either way, the game ends quickly.
One-sided plan, yeah. But it says, I do have one-sided plan, and if you play your first creature on turn 2 and the opponent already has a blocker, and then they have untapped mana whenever you're tapped out and can play a combat trick, you're so much on the back foot through that. And I think that I try to build decks not to be that one-sided in terms of my game plans, because I like to do my weird stuff. And because of that, I am actually better on the draw because, my decks are built to last longer. And because they're built to last longer, the advantage of playing the land first is sort of removed by the fact that I will draw that extra card. And, you see the graphs and you know exactly the point when the extra card becomes beneficial. And you also know exactly the point when that extra card also loses any kind of benefit.
Yeah.
So it's like, if the game ends before turn 8, the advantage is for the player who started the game.
Right.
If the game lasts longer than turn 8 till about turn 14, the advantage is on the player who drew the extra card. And after turn 15, the advantages disappear because it's so long that neither the one card or who started matters anymore.
Yeah. From data scientist perspective, or somebody who just deals with coaxing useful information out of numbers or statistics like you do all day, I thought of a comparison or something that came to my mind, and I wanted to run it by you, which is that, these types of one number stats rarely tell the story, right? This says that 8.65 is when the average game ends in Bloomburrow. But, one of the things that I like history, I watch a lot of documentaries and stuff like that about history. And, one of the common misconceptions that comes up all the time, especially if you go to medieval times or something like that, where we had some semblance of records or some things were starting to be tracked on some level, which is that the average lifespan. Man,
I thought you were saying we're going to get to go to medieval times, because that would be sick. That would be sick.
I would go with you, Luis.
I do a live LR at medieval times.
We'd also be the two smartest people in the world, not remotely close. But one of the things that comes up in that all the time that seems to be a misconception, is the average lifespan, right? And it was somewhere around 40 or the early 40s, but multiple sources that I've watched on YouTube or read in a book or whatever have said that's true, but it's just a raw average, right? And it doesn't account, it doesn't tell the story.
50% of children die before the age of 5.
Right. And so
the average will be 40 if the rest of the people live to be 70.
Right,
or 75.
but what it leads to is people thinking that people were dying at about between age 40 and 50 of old age. So they were, you'll hear a lot of people say anecdotal things, well, yeah, that person had to, do this by this age because you just didn't live that long back then. But it's not actually true. When they looked at the skeletons and the things that they found, the people that did make it to, say, age 20 something, they actually lived similar lifespans to what we do, not to the late 70s and 80s, but to 60 something.
19th century, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. To 60s, or it wouldn't be uncommon to have somebody in their 70s, alive at that time. And then, yes, something would eventually catch up to them and get them.
That applies to men, because women had a different issues there. And they, first of all, had the risk of dying early. Then they had the risk of dying in childbirth. Once they go through all of that their husband beheaded them or something.
You're right. Exactly. But that's another thing that sort of folded into this average lifespan, one number. That's it. Right. So it would be different if you're a man or a woman. And also it didn't play out how you would assume it did if you heard that the average lifespan was 40, right? It wasn't how life actually was then. It was, as you said, a lot of much younger people than we're used to now were dying, and it would change the average, but you would still see old people. You would have old people around, and they very much existed. Is there something like that with this, where if we just say, hey, average number of turns, 8.65, that's the second fastest in the history of Arena. Obviously it's okay to take away from the fact that this is fast, but is there more to be gleaned from it, similar to the example I gave?
Yes. So first of all, I did this comparison specifically because I know how boomers like some people I know.
You mean all three of us?
I'm not a boomer. I'm a zoomer.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Gen Alpha.
I started at Dominaria. I'm a young and ambitious player with 43 years of experience being young.
Let's just say that the amount of light reflecting off your scalp makes that claim dubious at best.
Are you calling out Kenji?
Yeah. He's actually a zoomer.
So I did specifically this analysis on Khans of Tarkir because it was on Arena. So we can actually look at it. I'm not saying that this was the best iteration of Khans of Tarkir that there can be, because there were lots of people who had absolutely no idea what they were doing and just played a couple of drafts. So it's not, probably not as good as the peak Khans of Tarkir on Modo in 1973 when it was released. But this format was very slow, even when you look at the data from 17 lands. So it was like the average was 10 turns compared to the 8.6 of this. And I compared this to a fast set, which if I remember correctly, was maybe MKM or something like that.
Sure.
I don't remember exactly. But the main difference between those two sets was that the number of games that ended early was very similar. But as you reach this peak of the distribution, there was slightly fewer games that ended between this framework of turn 7 to turn 10. And then there was plenty of games that went on and on and on and on and on. And this is what makes the average. The small number of games that went on till 1024 because no one could find a win con. And this thing doesn't exist in the modern sets because they are designed in that way that they are very assertive. And eventually you will find your win con, you or your opponent will find the win con, and the game is going to end before turn 25. Mm-hmm. There's almost no games that last till turn 25. The only reason why Khans were slower by those 1.5 turns is a lot of those games that lasted forever.
Interesting.
And I don't know if that's something that is very beneficial for us, and we would want that if that would be the case. Mm-hmm. Because no one wants to sit there and just like draw, land, go, draw, land, go, draw, land. That's just not an appealing, at least not for me, magic. But if you looked at the number of the games that ended between 6 and 9 turns, I was almost the same between Khans and this very fast format called whatever MKM it was. So
interesting.
In the end, it's not the front of the tail that changed; it's the end of the tail that changed. And I think that this is a good design from WotC, that the games don't last forever, and there's not of those like 40 minutes grinds that are not productive. And in the end, who will top decks better wins.
That's interesting.
Very mid-2010s kind of magic.
I would not say that a lot of the 40-minute games I've had, which Bloomburrow's had more of these than I expected. The last
because you play
draft,
frogs. Frogs are a grind fest.
Yes, that is true. The last Bloomburrow draft I posted it, which I actually think is probably going to be the last one I'm going to post, just because I've had my fill of of posting the videos. Though I keep drafting the format, but the people demand cube, of course. Every new format comes out, I'll do a bunch of drafts, and then people want to watch cube. But the last one I drafted, I had a frogs deck that had the season of creation, the blue season, or weaving, the blue season, and Barkform Harvester to put on bottom of my deck, and 3 cash grabs and 2 Thunder Trap trainers. And it was a 40-minute game, one of the games where I went through my whole deck and all that, and that was just awesome. That was super fun.
Okay, yeah, no. If you do the Sam Black assemble the loops and recreate the loops, that is actually fun. I'm talking more about the games where you cannot win because neither of you assembled anything, and it just goes on forever.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I think that's something that, we'll have to become more aware of going forward, is a little bit more depth about how the games are actually playing out. So especially if we get another quick format after this, we'll feel it out, right? Because Luis and I had similar feels, but I would like to, bug you about it when you come on the show, Sierkovitz, about, this one feels fast and is fast. Because to me, this one feels fast only in the sense that Luis described and that you did too, Sierkovitz, where, it can be very punishing. Being on the draw and not having a relevant play for turn 1 or turn 2 feels unacceptable, right? Like you are just so likely to get ran over in a premier draft game that, the thing I brought up when we talked about this last a couple of shows ago with Luis is, the casualty that I see out of all this is just the lack of a comeback. Magic's mechanics, mana system, lands, and that type of stuff does lend to the occasional comeback, and that's really important to why this game's great. It's one of the reasons that you get stories. Oh, I had this and my opponent had this and this, but I came back and won, where that can be very difficult to organically put into a game. It's not that hard to just put a comeback mechanic in that says, hey, randomly you get a bunch of extra stuff because you're behind, or literally randomly or whatever. But Magic actually, through some combination of genius and luck, ended up with that built into it. And it does feel like that suffers when we have formats that are on the quicker side, or where you're really forced to, put your mana curve low and to do things that
the great Richard Garfield by claiming it's luck.
I said some combination. Maybe he was the genius and the luck.
I think it's the problem is of the get good. We can come back to on the play advantage, because I think that this is like the important issue there. I did this analysis just before we started because you asked me to.
Oh yeah.
Told me to, and you see that it's the top win rate players that play more short games than the bottom win rate players. Why? Well, mainly because their opponents are very often not ready for their good curve outs. They build a deck with a good curve out in mind, and when the good curve out appears and the opponent is not prepared, that ends. And I don't know how many episodes ago that I was here when we talked about how important it is to spend all your mana every turn, and if you underspend even by turn 2 by 1 mana, you're so much behind. Well, not putting 2 drops in your deck and not having a 2 turn 2 play is spending 2 mana less most of the time.
Yes.
And if you spend 2 mana less most of the time, well, then you're going to be behind. And this has been always the case. Yes. And it's nothing changing. And yes, probably because of the streamlined mana draws of the smoother that's being exacerbated in best of 1. But even in best of 3, you want to have those 2 drop plays. Most frequently, my decks look right now that I have like between 11 and 12, 1 and 2 drop plays. And then a gap, and then I have like a bunch of 5s or 6s, and there's sort of like a U-shaped kind of mana curve when it's definitely loaded very much on the 2 drops, some 3 drops maybe, and then sort of like the top end that will help me win the game. And this works great for me because I will not get run over if I have so many 1 drops and 2 drops, and then because I also have those more expensive cards, I will frequently come out on top of those super aggressive decks because they are good until someone drops a 6/6.
Right.
Sierkovitz plays both sides, so he always comes out on top.
That's right. All right. Well, we got to wrap up here. Last thought on that. You're right, Sierkovitz. This has always been the case, but it is worse now. Like this has become very, very, like you do not want 53+% win rate with Bloomburrow, with LCI, with Mom, with MKM. All of those, are relatively recent, and those are all the ones that are over in that side.
This is the fault of the Excel set design a bit, where maybe sometimes shaking up the Excel sheet would be beneficial, because if you continue to make the similar creatures, even though they change the mechanics and change the it's more like twitching
Yes.
than innovation. It's more like
Than something novel.
This is what companies do with compared to science. Like companies, they will have to have something, and they'll be very good at optimizing it and making it best as that it is. Science is good in shaking things up and changing it and doing it completely differently. Something companies have struggling with because, of course, there's no financial incentives for revolutionizing things. There is a direct financial incentive for making things just ever so slightly better.
Right.
But through evolution rather than revolutionary changes.
So we'll see.
I wouldn't say there's no incentive, but the EV is a lot.
The cost, the cost is huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
The people who can do that are like a drug company that can spend $1 billion trying to develop a drug, where if it works, they make $4 billion. But they know
but
they
still,
won't.
This company will, because I do know a bit about how pharmaceutical industry works in terms of R&D. This company will first invest probably like $1 million in sponsoring like 5 universities to develop hundreds of tests, and from those hundreds they will pick maybe 4, and that's how they do it, because they let scientists do the super risky stuff because scientists love it, and then they will pick up the most promising one and then start the optimization, and then from then
Right.
But yeah, we're talking about billions of dollars to be spent to produce something that is not guaranteed.
Well, let's hope that that Wizards rights the ship a little bit on that, because you can see that the bones are here. The spreadsheet style of limited game design does work. It does produce a consistently good product, but there needs to be room to maneuver the ship a little bit, and it's definitely gotten off course with Game Radar.
I'm sure that they will. It's the same as the bots were in the bot draft. When in the beginning the bots were just having so few personalities that it was very same. Every single time it was the same. But now the bots have multiple personalities, and I think that their Excel sheet design can stay, but they need to have several sets of Excel sheets that produce different results every time. And then they can do it, and people will be super thrilled.
I think so too, and I actually would expect them to take those steps. Sierkovitz, thanks so much for taking the time to hang out. Where can people find you, and what have you been up to? What you got anything going on?
So I'm still where I am on my bench in my kitchen. I'm going on a holiday the next week. I'm super excited to go to Italy to be rejoined with my family, who I haven't seen for 2 weeks. I mean, I've seen them on Skype or whatever.
Okay, that's great.
On WhatsApp. But I stayed with the dog, but for the last week we actually hired someone to dog sit with him, so I can actually taste some Italy and get some good food in the south. I've been doing some data analysis recently. I started coaching.
Very nice.
That's something I'm doing right now. I actually recorded a session of coaching with Shivam Bhatt. I don't know, you know Shivam because
he's a good friend of our show. Yeah,
I did his podcast is called Casual Magic, and I titled my episode Causal Magic with Shivan Bhatt. Flip 2 letters, you get something very different.
If somebody was interested in coaching, could they get a hold of you for that? Or
they can just pester me on Twitter, or pester me on YouTube, or pester me on my Discord, which is free for everyone, unlike some Discords.
All right, I'll put your Twitter. I'll put your Twitter link in the. In the show notes, so that if people want to get a hold of you about the Discord or about maybe some coaching, they can get a hold of you. Thanks, Sierkovitz. We appreciate you coming on as always.
No problem. My pleasure as always, and it's always fun, and it's always surprising what we're going to talk about. And
I know what you mean. We keep him in suspense. Let's just say.
I literally, we talked about the format speed. I just remember during the recording that I did this comparison with the concept arc here, because I did it ages ago, and now I remember I found it in between, and that would be. And now you know why you did it,
because I was going to ask you one day. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis's LSV, pretty much everywhere. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And I want to say thank you once again to everybody who supports us on Patreon, as well as Ultimate Guard for sponsoring the show. That's going to do it for this week. We'll see you next time.
I got to say, Marshall, when I talked about going to medieval times, I did not mean going back to, the
what did you
700s.
mean?
Have you never been to medieval times?
Oh, is this the thing at the Excalibur or whatever?
It's so fun. So medieval times.
I have never gone. No,
there's a bunch of them. And I remember I went to one as a kid. It was like one of the best days of my life as a kid. It was. But
would you really go with me now?
Yes. I mean, like obviously it's hard for me to travel right now, but like
I mean at this stage of our life.
Oh, totally.
Oh,
so
I'm
medieval
in.
times, for those who don't know, medieval times
Like
is it's an experience. So it's like you go, you pay your entry, and what you get to do is you sit in the stands of like an arena, and there's these knights that like joust, but it's kind of like wrestling, where like it's kind of fake, it's obviously like scripted. It's a show. There's like the evil knight, and there's like the good knight, and there's like the knights, they're saying things to each other, and they're doing all this stuff, and like it is. And you get this plate of food with like a giant like chicken leg and like potatoes, and like you get a big soda, which as a kid, like my parents never let me drink soda, so getting one there was like a big game. And like it's just like the most fun things. Google medieval times, like entertainment or LA. I know there's one in LA, and you can find it. It's basically like a Renaissance fair, but like as a show. Like if you went there, it's like kind of like a sporting event, and it was a blast. So you know what? Maybe we'll record a live LR from medieval times, or maybe we'll just go to medieval times.
You can come to Cornwall. We have a castle that has regular jousting tournaments.
Oh, there we go.
Done.
And it's an actual castle from Henry VIII.